Good day, everyone. We're going to get started now. This is Elisa Chambers. I'm the Director of Marketing at Root, and I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar, 6 Trends for Strategy Success. Jim Haudan, CEO of Root, and Bridget Stallkamp, Managing Director at Root, are going to be your hosts for this event. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. If you would like to ask questions, you can submit them in the Q&A bar on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be taking questions at the end of the official presentation. And if you have any challenges, you can chat at the hosts, and we will help you answer any questions about the presentation throughout. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Haudan, CEO at Root.
Thank you, Elisa. It's a pleasure to spend the next hour or so with you on the line. And we're excited about releasing these 6 trends. We really believe that they are leading-edge trends and real insights to how to engage people and, more importantly, create high performance. As you begin to think about it, the best way to think about this might be, so what exactly are we doing? Root has established an insight group that has really performed a year-long analysis across multiple industries. And even before we talk about the research, it's important to realize there's a mindset or a framework that we've also established. And that is simply this, that, you know, in many organizations historically, and especially in consumer organizations, they've been very mindful of the consumer and what the consumer thinks, what the consumer feels, what the consumer likes, what really sticks with consumers, and what things consumers walk right by. So organizations naturally have sort of this customer-centric mindset. And it works for the best organizations, and for those that struggle, sometimes they're trying to achieve that. What we find is that the same perspective, the same concept, or the same idea needs to be applied to the consumers of strategy. So in many cases, whether it's an employee, a team member, an associate, to begin to think of them as consumers of strategies, and in that sense as customers, rather than mere cogs in a wheel of trying to execute. It begins to change the whole framework you bring to the table, and that is, how do we become curious? How do we really understand? How do we begin to test and retest our strategies with our people, rather than just try to get them to them and assume they will be executed as the way that they were really intended? So this whole concept of employees, associates, and team members as customers of strategy is the mindset that the Insight Group really brings to the table. And of course, the first thing you may want to ask is, why do so many organizations struggle with bringing strategies to life? And in case we're not clear, we do struggle. 60 to 90% of our strategies are not executed. 3/4 of our people are still not engaged. And fundamentally, it's costing us not only economic dollars in the absence of executing strategies through people, but it's really costing us in terms of not being able to realize the dreams and aspirations many of us have in our organizations to build something that doesn't exist. And so when you begin to think about these struggles, we have some ideas, but we also have some experiences. There are a lot of well-intended people in organizations trying to make this work. In our experience, leaders really do believe that every one of their individuals in their organization have the right to do noble work. Leaders also really believe that people are critical and valuable to the execution of strategy. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen the attempt that leaders make to sort of make that really the way they approach strategy execution. But yet it fails. On the other hand, if you look at people in organizations, most people really do want to contribute. They really do want to win. But yet, with the well-intended leaders and well-intended people, we seem to just fall way short, if not off the cliff, when it comes to beginning to execute new strategies and execute them to their intended outcomes. And so the real question then becomes, what are the inhibitors and accelerators to strategy adoption and success? What are the things that we can begin to look at and point to in very practical terms that really challenge all the prevailing statistics and allow dreams and aspirations to generate the results they're intended to? And that's kind of the real emphasis of this work. And that is, it's working in a few pockets, it's working in a few places. How do we really understand what's working, and how can we replicate that more readily? The thing that we are talking about in very practical terms is what exactly are the success routines of high-performance execution, and how do we make them tangible, very practical, and very street relevant rather than academic, theoretical, and conceptual. And that's why we're so excited about this breakthrough research, because we believe it does just that. And so when you begin to think about it, it is something that many organizations and many leaders can begin to go do immediately. So again, just with a little bit longer of a setup, I'd like to suggest where and how would you go look for high performance. So the simplest way to think about it is in a curve of performance, or a normal curve of distribution translated into a normal curve of performance. And if you think about this, we find this true in almost all organizations. At the left-hand side, there is some very suboptimal performance, and then as you move towards the middle, it's building, but it's still not there. And then you may get to the top, and that's where most of the people are. And then maybe on the far right side, you're getting close, but this far right, the extraordinary performers, this is where we're curious. This is where we want to know what's going on. This is where we want to really understand how and why people are coming together to execute in new ways on new strategies and generate results. So the X marks the spot is the place where the clues really are hidden, or the clues reside, or as we would say, the routines actually are being practiced. So then the next thing you would think about is, rather than going just to one organization, how would we go to a number of different organizations and begin to compare the research that occurs in those organizations? And so the way you would think about that is, how do we go to all the X's that we can find in various organizations where they are to the far right of performance, where real people are executing strategies and getting phenomenal results, and then begin to compare and combine those in the research findings to see just where we're at. Now again, when I talk about research, I'm talking about qualitative research, with ethnographic research practices and techniques. So we're not just focus grouping, we're not just getting surveys alone, we're really looking and observing what people are doing, what leaders are doing, what followers are doing, where this high performance exists.
And I think,
so
Jim,
the ultimate goal, I'm sorry, Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say that the plus side of doing research like that, in terms of doing it ethnographically versus the survey, is that we're not just taking what these folks say that they're doing, we're really watching it happen. And so often we have uncovered practices and routines and trends that the people themselves weren't even cognizant that they were doing. And that's sort of the beauty of that type of research, is that we can uncover some real hidden gems.
Thanks. And Bridget's going to pick up the details of each of these 6 routines in a second. And so I do think the slide that is up is just one way to think about this. What if we could change the curve of performance to right and tight? What if we could really understand those routines and make them the common practice across all of our organization, and then begin to look at the performance as not just being extreme extraordinary, but common extraordinary performance? And again, that's the goal, that's the aspiration, that's what we're excited about as we begin to look at these 6 very practical success routines. So with that, Bridget, maybe you could lead, and I may make a comment occasionally, but let's look at maybe the 6 success routines that really do deliver high performance across multiple operations that we've really used the research in the last 12 months.
Great. So I'll go ahead and, Justin, I seem to have lost control, so if you wouldn't mind clicking for me, we'll go to the first image there. The 6 success routines are really, when we looked at the insights across the board of all the research that we've done over a period of time, we were able to we're really able to have 6 things pop really prominently up to the surface when it comes to executing strategy. And so let's just go to this first one here. The first one, we've titled it Nurture a Strategy, Don't Launch It. And one of the best analogies for this is if you decided it was time for your child to learn how to ride a bike and start riding that bike to school, you wouldn't just hand her a bicycle and a helmet and say, good luck, have a nice day at school. And you wouldn't do that for the obvious reasons. She doesn't understand how to ride a bike. She's never been on one before. She doesn't have the balance, the proper skills to do it. And yet when we have a new strategy, when we've created or built a new strategy, we often launch it to the organization in some sort of presentation form and then just tell everybody that now it's time to go execute. We launch it out there into the world and kind of assume that everybody understands what we're doing and that they have the capabilities to do it. So I think what we found that the high performers can do is that they can, rather than launch a strategy, nurture it. So if you think of your organization as that child or as that person who's never done this before, you take a completely different approach to how you go about implementing your strategy because you don't just put it out there for your team to execute. You put it out there. You make it safe to have failure in some way. You iterate your learnings from those failures. You demonstrate what success looks like, and you show people what it is that you're talking about and what your vision is. You celebrate the early wins towards that vision, and you are continuously curious about what's holding us back. So rather than just getting frustrated when strategy doesn't go as planned, we really dive into what's going on there and what can we do to achieve our vision. And one of the best examples of this is a company that we've worked with actually quite recently and are still doing some work with. It's a very large call center organization here in the U.S., and they have decided that their strategy is really going to grow and expand over 3 years with their leaders. And they're going to bring together everyone at an annual point to take a look at where we are today in terms of executing our strategy, what can we do better, what is it that we failed at, and what can we learn from it. So the first year was the conference was all about laying out the playing field. This is the strategy. This is where we think we want to go. Let's get your feedback on how you think it's going to work in your part of the organization. The next piece was, okay, we're growing. We've stabilized. What can we learn from that? And this year, it's all about how can we lead? How can we continue to grow to the point that we're outpacing our industry and we're setting the standard? And so we've spent some time talking to some of the folks within their organization who have been able to lead already, who have experienced double-digit growth in an industry that's only experiencing single-digit growth, and be able to sit down and talk with them about what it is that they're doing so that we can take that information to this conference and really have leaders spend some time talking about how can they apply those learnings within their own part of the business so that everyone can grow. It's a really great way to do it, and it seems obvious when you start talking about it, but it's not so obvious when you're in the mix of strategy creation.
And Bridget, I think one key issue, I'm specifically talking about the left side where it says be continuously curious about what's holding us back. I think we see organization after organization that, again, well-intended, tries to communicate, repeat the communication, and then update the communication, all with this sense of belief that we just have to keep telling until it becomes ingrained. But the telling doesn't create the ingrainedness. It is actually learning from the failures. It is being curious about the holdbacks. I mean, it would be akin to what you showed us in the first slide, and that is, here are your handlebars, here are your training wheels, here is your helmet, and just keep telling them that. Here's your helmet, here's your handlebars, here's your training wheels, without any idea that they just can't figure out how the steering works, or they just don't realize that they need something different to reach the pedals, or. So I think this concept of being curious about what's holding us back is not, trying to be soft on the strategy. It's really trying to be very conscious about what are the capability inhibitors that need to be nurtured until the early wins build the confidence to then becomes the common way that we are performing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And we've seen many a case, I think, Jim, where that curiosity is lacking, we've seen strategies flounder for years on end as the strategy creators just can't figure out why nobody understands what's going on when they keep telling them every month what it is. Great. So let's go to the next success routine here, and that's hardwiring the last 100 yards. So if you think of strategy as a utility, as energy, the strategy creators are sort of like the power plant, the generation of the energy. The management of the organization is sort of the distribution of that, so taking that energy from the plant and bringing it into the local area. And then there's one last step there, which is hardwiring the last 100 yards, going from that utility pole all the way into the house, into the wiring system, through the outlet, so that the light bulb can actually go on. It's a really critical part, and if you think about it in terms of strategy, you know, we create the strategy, we deliver it to the local area, but we are often missing that last 100 yards, and then we don't understand why there's a disconnect for people between the new strategy and what they do every day. Because employees really need to have clarity and purpose if they're going to drive your strategy, and they can only have that if that connection is made from the strategy that's been brought into their local part of the business all the way down to their role. But if
Bridget,
that part
I think interestingly here, we hear a lot that even people that are really excited about being part of the future, you know, it's almost like they're saying, put me in, coach, I want to go, and as they whisper, as they run on the field, they say, but tell me again what you want me to do, because it's not clear to me. And so, you know, we have a double problem. We have some people that might be hesitant, but for the ones that really want to do it, they're still not clear what they need to do and what they need to do different.
That's right. And so the companies that we've seen actually succeed in this and do it really well, we've actually seen a lot of retail and hospitality companies do this very well. They've been able to connect the dots between strategy and the job. They've been able to illustrate the behaviors that most need to change, and they've been able to leverage individual strengths to the desired results. A great example of this is at a hotel chain that we recently worked with. Actually, we did this research about a year ago, but I'll never forget, I was standing there with a front desk employee talking through with her her daily job, and she said, every day I go in and look at our customer satisfaction scores. I know exactly which ones the front desk connects to, and I rate myself, and I really try to understand where can I be doing things better and differently to improve the scores, because I know that customer satisfaction and our guest experience is going to be a huge differentiator for us in this market. I mean, it was amazing the way that she said that, but she was able to connect her role to a very specific metric that was going to move the needle for the entire organization. It's just amazing. We've also seen it in retail, where managers of high-performing stores have been able to create individual metric systems that connect to desired goals within the organization. And that's bringing the strategy all the way down to the shift, basically, to the work shift. And it's pretty neat to see in action, because it creates an amazing sense of engagement and great understanding of what the organization is trying to achieve right there at the frontline level. Okay, let's move on to our next success routine, which is figuring out the great paradox of accountability. So we've seen in many organizations, we either tip way too far to the accountability piece, and that's that little castle you see at the top of that image. If it's mine, it's my business, and I drive it to success. If it's yours, I don't really care about it, it's your problem. On the flip side of that, we have organizations that are collaborative to a fault. Collaborative to the point where they don't have a decision-making mechanism, and they aren't able to drive to good solutions or to real results. A couple of examples of that, we have a recent client who instituted a PPR program, a primary person responsible program, and they did that in response to some lack of role clarity within the organization. Unfortunately, they weren't able to balance out the sort of collaborative aspects necessary for the strategy and the accountability aspects. And now they're having huge problems with that program because people like the head of security says, okay, well, if security is it's totally my responsibility, I'm not going to let you guys do anything that might risk that, and has a stranglehold on the business as a result. And there's dozens more examples within that organization of where the scales have tipped far too much to the accountability side. The collaborative side, I was actually with a group yesterday, which I was greatly impressed by their candor and their ability to debate. But in the end, they had no decision-making mechanism because they all felt like their voices were equal in this and nobody was changing their mind. And while a lot of ideas got bounced around, they never were able to come to a solution because nobody was the final decision-maker or the maker of the final calls in that group. Another great story that someone told me recently was they are the head of a business unit down in Brazil, and they were talking to their finance rep. They had a question. The finance rep called somebody at headquarters. That somebody at headquarters called somebody else at headquarters. That person called the lead finance person in Brazil, who actually called the finance person who was sitting at the table. Nobody knew the answer. Nobody was responsible for that information. And as a result, they went round and around and were never able to come up with an answer to really solve the problem that was at issue that day at that table. It's a really difficult thing to do.
I think the other thing here, Bridget, before you get to sort of the routines attributes that we find successful, is we have to realize that paradoxes polarize people too. And polarization of people really creates sort of this frustration and even an unnecessary adversarialism, and that is, you know, are we going to be collaborative or are we going to be accountable? And you know, people have different preferences for that, but usually you find people go to the corners on that, which even creates more of the inhibitor or impediment to high performance than we might normally think, because it really doesn't always put people in the corner on one side or the other. It then believes that leadership is really not answering the most critical questions we need to address to be successful. So this is a major issue and one of the biggest inhibitors. And as we've looked at the research, the companies that are really performing well, people really understand the "and" of this in a unique way. And so I think, Bridget, you were going to share a couple of those details.
Right, and this is a big issue, and a lot of companies haven't figured it out, and it's a very rare organization that has. And what we saw more often was not that the whole organization figured it out, but perhaps one small segment of the organization had figured out a way to work together and balance that sort of accountability and collaborative paradox. But the keys to success in those areas were that they were able to answer the collaborative and accountable questions. They redefined it as co-accountable, and it's a rare organization that's able to define co-accountability without absolving everyone of responsibility. But they're able to do it, and a couple of things lent to that success. The first was defining clearly the collective results required. So in co-accountability, they also had metrics that they shared, that they were jointly responsible for. So everyone had skin in the game in getting to the same result. They also made it very clear how handoffs would occur. In this particular instance that I'm thinking about, this was in a produce distributor. So it was sort of the middleman in the produce market that gets, you know, the fruit to your grocery store, and because they're a distributor, they have buyers who buy fruit from the growers, and they have sellers who get that fruit out to the different stores or restaurants or whatever it is that's actually going to serve that produce. That can be a very contentious environment, and it was for several years, as sellers would say, you bought this junk, I can't sell this stuff for high enough of a margin, and buyers would say, you're not working hard enough to sell my stuff, and you're hurting me, and there was a lot of animosity that built up over time. But they brought in some new managers for those two groups, and those two managers sat down and said, hey, listen, we need each other to be successful, so how can we create a sense of co-accountability around the final metrics for this organization, which is ultimately revenue and margin. I mean, that's ultimately what everybody was after. So they were able to work out systems where it was clear where the buyer was responsible for things, where the seller was responsible for things, and how that handoff needed to occur. So they put some processes in place. They also created some bonding between these folks. These people got to know each other better in ways that they hadn't before, spent a little time in some non-performance related environments to learn more about each other and to trust each other more. And ultimately, we're able to create a sense of co-accountability where they could really collaborate and understand, what the end market wanted, what the growers had, and work together to make that process as smooth as possible. And they have been growing their company by leaps and bounds over the past 18 months or so. So we've really seen some great success there.
One of the examples that comes to mind too here, Bridget, is that we've been working with a large chemical company, and this whole issue of the cost structure in terms of the changing environment is really key, because the paradox that has been set up there around accountability has been, do you want us to be safe or do you want us to be efficient? And so that paradox, is all around this accountability to be tremendously safe and therefore eliminate all risk, or do you want us to be efficient and therefore competitive to a changing marketplace? And it has locked down just about everybody in the company, because the argument about what's more important, safe or efficient, has just caused most people not trying to answer that question in a way that, what is it that we will be absolutely safe on, and where can we take the risks necessary to change the cost structure of the business so we are competitive going forward. And again, the point being, if we could get after answering that question, we could clearly begin to change the performance of the business. But as long as we stay stuck in what appears to be these polar opposites or these polar contradictions rather than complements, we're not going to really move forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think it's worth noting, these are very difficult questions to answer, and they take time, and it takes a lot of patience. And it's almost like launching a strategy in itself. It takes nurturing. It takes learning from mistakes, openness, and feedback loops to really find the right balance and wrestle these questions to the ground. Let's move on to the next success routine, which is not lost in translation. If you've ever tried to pick up a trade magazine from another organization, it's sort of like reading a code. Go and try to read the New England Journal of Medicine if you're not a doctor, or read a magazine about computer programming if you aren't a computer, in computer engineering, or at least have that as a passion or hobby. It's almost impossible, and it feels like it's written in code. And we've all experienced a sense of that, of sort of being outside of the jargon of the group. And yet, when we create strategies, we often spend a lot of time as a small group haggling over this word and that word, and discussing the metrics and the analytics, and getting so deep and so immersed in it that what comes out of it is very clear to us, but is most likely not clear to the rest of the organization. We tend to use leadership jargon versus the shop talk of our organization. And what the result of that is that the rest of the organization really doesn't understand at all what it is we're talking about and what it is they want us to do. The best organizations, the organizations that solve this problem the best, are the ones that constantly consider empathy for what it's like to not know. They are curious about what it is their people know and don't know about the business today, and what questions they have. They write any sort of communication in the language of the receiver. They have people read through it. Is it at the right grade level? Is it the right technical information? Does it speak to the daily activities of the organization? All things that are going to help your strategy resonate with the rest of the population. And they prioritize, they interpret, and they simplify. So rather than giving the entire organization a 90-page PowerPoint or something like that, they bring it down to what are the foundational things that everyone needs to know, and then how can we sort of divvy up the information so that we simplify it for the rest of us and we prioritize what matters most to the different parts of the organization. It's a really key, important skill that we often forget. Go ahead, Jim.
Sometimes I think this really comes to life when you put yourself in the shoes of the receiver and actually experience what they experience. We were at a QSR, or a quick serve restaurant, with one of the organizations that we were looking at the high performance restaurants versus the non-high performance. And what we went in there to see was the general manager, and it was interesting because as we went in, this general manager had a bulletin board about the size of many bulletin boards, which meant there were probably, maybe 10 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that could go across the top. And then the rest of the bulletin board was all filled with these different sheets of paper. And then it was about 5 feet high on the wall, and then leaning down all the way to the floor were taped on sheets of paper. So there were just dozens of sheets of paper on that wall. It looked like a kite. I mean, it looked like somebody had made sort of a kite in the room that they were going to take out, and they supersized it. And so we asked that general manager, what was this? And she said, it's just what the home office has sent out in the last week that we must do. In other words, the new menu issues, the new operation issues, the new cost issues, the new finance issues, and so the individual I was with, who was very senior in the organization, said, so what do you decide to do? And she responded, we just do what keeps us out of trouble. And that moment in time, it became so very clear that the prioritization, integration, and simplification, when it occurs at the receiver level, is often just based on what you think might be the one that gets you in trouble. Whereas if you could do this as a sender, you could create a relative emphasis that would allow people that want to make a difference to know exactly the cadence of what needs to be done and lock right into that. And so this whole prioritization, integration, and simplification, when it occurs, the probability of high performance goes up dramatically. When it doesn't occur, many people tell us it's like playing the children's game whack-a-mole. You just knock down the next thing that comes at you without any rhyme or reason to what's strategic, important, or impactful.
Great. Let's go into our next success routine, return receipt required. We think this one is really interesting because if you send out a package, and I know at Root we're sending out materials to clients all the time, and I will tell you, I get that tracking number and I watch it like a hawk. I want to know that that box of materials has gotten to its destination. We all do that. If we order something on Amazon, we track it through Amazon. We want to know where it's where it is and how long it's going to take to get to us. What we don't do, we don't often apply that to strategy and communicating with our people. We put it out there maybe in a town hall or send an email to all the managers saying, hey, these are the things you need to talk about with your team. We sort of wipe our hands clean and say, okay, our job as the strategy creators is complete. The strategy is out there. Now it's your turn to do something with it. And we see that happen all the time, and it's not it's not anybody wanting to do anything malicious. It's just a natural tendency to not ask for, hey, did you get it? Did you see it? Did you hear it? Did you understand it? What does it look like to you? The best organizations, when it comes to executing strategy, really build in robust and rapid feedback loops. They want to know, what did you get? What did you understand from it? What does it look like to you? What do you think you should be doing differently? And they continue to improve the strategy so that the intention of it and the reality of it really intersect. They continue to make tweaks in the way that they communicate in the way that they execute, in the way that the processes work based on the feedback that they get. It's exactly like running any sort of machine. You gotta listen to it and see, okay, what are the dials saying, and let me twist this and turn that and move it around so that we're getting optimal performance. The same thing applies for an organization. You really have to listen to what's happening, read the dials, get that information back in order to know what changes need to occur. We've also seen the best performers be as interested in what is not clear as what is. So it's not just saying to everyone, hey, is that clear? But it's really asking, what isn't clear? What isn't making sense to you? What isn't jibing with what you see in your everyday? And let me help you figure out how to make it connect with the realities of the business as you see it. It's a really important one that as you think about it, again, feels very simple, but it's one that a lot of organizations miss. But the ones that we've seen make it really work, leadership has really nurtured people and listened to people and asked, what's making sense to you, what doesn't. And we've had, organizations that were part of our research, they changed the way that they managed performance. They changed the way they incentivized. They tweaked the way that the strategy was being executed. They didn't change the vision, but they tweaked the way it would be executed based on feedback from the field. And they're continuously curious about how that new information or those new tweaks are being read. Okay. Let's move on to the last success routine, which is why matters more than you think. At Root, we've been saying for a long time that people will tolerate the conclusions of their leaders, but they'll ultimately act on their own. So it was no surprise when, in our research, this theme really bubbled up to the surface, that context really matters to people, especially when you're asking them to do something different. They really need to believe that what they're doing makes sense, that it is going to give the company a sense of success. And a big part of that is just having people understand the competitive dimensions of their organization. There are very few people in organizations that we've seen that can accurately tell you what the company's value proposition or competitive advantage is, and how they're competing against their competition today. And what is worrisome about that is that there are hundreds of thousands of decisions that are being made at the front line or perhaps the next level up, manager level, every single day, and yet they don't have the proper context to make those decisions, and they don't have time to run them up the flagpole. So the farther down you can put the why and make it really clear as to why we have the strategy we do, the better people can calibrate their decisions to really align with that strategy and ultimately create success for the organization. The organizations that we've seen do this really well elevate thinking to the highest level on the marketplace drama. So they really get people to elevate their thinking about what's going on in their marketplace. They get people to know exactly what our position is in the marketplace. Are we the top? Are we in the middle? Are we climbing up the ladder, or are we sliding down right now? And they know which competition creates the biggest threat. So they're really aware not only of where we are, but which competitors are really getting in our way. And one of our clients does this extremely well. It's the hotel chain Hampton. And at Hampton, they really focus on an unconditional guarantee as a differentiator. And they believe that that differentiator comes from a customer experience. So they spent a lot of time investing in line-level employees because they believe those are the only people that really affect the customer experience. So they spend a lot of time investing in helping them prioritize what they need to do, helping them understand the competitive landscape and why the customer experience makes such a difference, and then really having them understand what the customer experience looks like and how people can translate that into their own personal roles and behavior, so that in the unexpected situation with a customer, they can continue to provide a consistent experience, even if it isn't something that was in the policy book or was in the training, that individual is armed with enough context to make the right decisions for the brand.
So thank you, Bridget. And I think one of the things we wanted to talk about is, by using these 6 success routines, you significantly increase execution results. And I just want to revisit, too, that how this came about. We are often engaged to go into a single organization. You mentioned Hampton as an example. So we're engaged to go into a single organization, to go to the absolute high performers at the far right, right and tight, or X marks the spot, and really, through our research, through our ethnographic research, understand what are the success routines, what are people doing in those hotels that allow them to outperform everybody else. And then our goal is to take that insight, those routines, and move them back to the average performers in an organization and begin to pilot those to watch how they can change their performance, because they are now adopting and adapting those success routines to the way they run the hotel. And then we might go, as you mentioned, to a retailer, or we might go to an oil company and do the same thing. The uniqueness of these 6 routines is that it doesn't represent one company. It represents a number of these different companies where we went all the way to the right to extraordinary performance, dissected all of those success routines for each of these different companies in each of these different industries, and then we brought them all together. So in some respect, it's insights on insights, the voices from the street of extraordinary performance. And what we found was these 6 just kept showing up. They showed up at the retailer. They showed up in the hospitality environment. They showed up for the manufacturer. They showed up for the financial service organization. And you just sat back and said, my gosh, these are not just unique to one organization or one industry. They cross organizations and they cross industries. And so the 6 routines that we talked about, which I know are not on the screen, but nurture a strategy, don't launch it. Hardwire the last 100 yards. Answering the great paradox of accountability. Making sure we're not lost in translation. Enabling and rigorously pursuing the return receipt, and understanding why matters more than you think, are those 6 routines. And I think when you begin to look at those, these 6 routines probably enable any organization and any team within an organization to begin to change, first and foremost, your mindset, to begin to see people as the customers of strategy, and approach that as you would any customer. And that is not without an expectation of sell and tell, but one of understand, nurture, and develop. And then begin to realize how that accelerates results in ways that are extremely exciting. And then finally transforms your entire organization to be sort of at the extraordinary right and tight, versus having majority of the organization at a midstream mediocrity, and then only a few performing at the far right, which is really extraordinary. And so again, these routines would be one of the ways to really begin to think about, how you can begin to transform the organization, accelerate results, and truly engage the people that are bringing our strategies, dreams, and aspirations to life.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim and Bridget. I really appreciate that. And as a quick reminder, please submit any questions that you have using the Q&A bar on the right-hand side of your screen. We've had a couple come in throughout the webinar, so I'm going to kick off with one of those. Which of these 6 routines do you feel is the most difficult to accomplish?
Bridget, how about if I let you go first on that one?
All right. I really feel like the great paradox of accountability is the one that we see companies struggle with the most and is most difficult to really put into place. It's a very tricky thing. It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, usually amongst people who at that moment don't have the greatest of morale. So I think it is the biggest struggle that I've seen.
Bridget, I second that completely. I think, we find many leaders that just get frustrated with their teams and their people and say, you know, darn it, just be accountable. And we hear this word, just do your job, as if somehow voicing that and emphasizing it creates people to want to just make it happen. And I think the big miss here is that there's an absence, complete absence of addressing the tough issues that we haven't defined the complement of what appears to be in contradiction on accountability and collaboration.
Great. One more. So through this research that you've been doing, what was the most fascinating or interesting discovery that you found across the different industries that you studied? Was there anything that jumped out to either of you?
It's all so fascinating. I think that for me, the ahas around, it is so exciting to see people at the front line really engaged in their strategy and how their managers have been able to do that well. And I think that was some of the most surprising for me is around hardwiring the last 100 yards and the level of effort and collaboration it takes at a frontline manager and employees at that level to make sure that strategy really comes to life. It really reinforced for me how important, what a linchpin that role is, that first-line manager role is, and how important it is for them to understand the strategy well enough to translate it down to their individual. So that was probably the biggest surprise for me.
You know, Bridget, I think we're 2 for 2 because the gap between clueless and connected is a huge gap. I mean, it's just, and even as consumers, we see it all the time. We can go into a service organization and say that individual just doesn't get it, you know. And on the other place, it's like, wow, what an experience. And a lot of that has to do with hardwiring the last 100 yards. So when you think about this, the gap between clueless and connected, and let's just assume for a second, clueless, the individual we're labeling clueless, wants to do a good job. But it's just such a dramatic different experience when you're a consumer, but it's also such a dramatic different experience when it comes to being locked on and linked in to the adventure of a strategy that people really are if they're connected and are not if they're clueless.
Great. And I think this is our last question, unless another one comes in soon. But so the question was around the lines of, is the key to all of this getting the leadership team on board with it, or is it largely just around engaging employees? Like, where do you kind of start this, I think? Bridget, do you want to take the first crack at this one?
Sure. So I think that as I look at this, I have yet to go into an organization where the employees are engaged and the leadership is not. So I think it does start at the leadership level because leaders need to understand that nurture aspect of implementing a strategy before a lot of these other aspects can really come into play well. So for me, I think getting leadership on board, getting them to see and understand the importance of these different success routines, to me is the first step.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone on the phone. We really appreciate your interest in attending the webinar today and hope you found it valuable. And if you need any other information, don't hesitate to reach out to Root or go to our website at rootinc.com. With that, thank you, Jim and Bridget, and I will close it out at this point. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks.